My wife and dogs, they might bark here.
Okay.
All right, who remembered to hit the record button?
Yeah, because
We're getting good at this, and it's the last one.
exactly. Well, maybe I'll just start welcoming people and then we'll keep letting people in. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jenny Glessman and I'm with the Sage Hill Community Futures office. And on behalf of our office and the Northwest Community Futures out of North Battleford, Lisa isn't able to join us today, but we'd just like to welcome everybody to the last of our series. This has been a series of 4 workshops that we've done with Shelley. I know lots were on with us last month with the grant ready. So now we're on to the grant writing. A little bit about Community Futures. We're 13 offices across the province of Saskatchewan. We are a program all across Canada. We offer loans, advice, and support to businesses. But we also do lots of work with community groups, like sessions like today. So if you have questions about, grants and things like that, that's what our offices are always here for. But we also do the small business side with the loans and advice and support. So don't hesitate to look up and see where there's an office close to you, because like I said, the province is divided into 13 offices. So we all have an area that we look after, but feel free to give us a call and we'd be glad to help out. We're a large group today, so we're just going to ask everybody to make sure that you stay muted. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, and she's going to do our land acknowledgement.
Good morning. As we gather here today, we acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. If we could just ask everybody to mute, that would be great before we get started. And just so everybody knows, we have such a big group today, and if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat, and then we'll get to them at the end of Shelley's session. Also, when we're done with the formal part of the session and we log out, there will be a survey that automatically pops up in Zoom. And if you could complete that, we would greatly appreciate it, as we really rely on your feedback to be able to promote and offer programming to you, that you are interested in. So with that being said, Shelley, thank you again for being here.
Awesome. It's wonderful to be here. And just a bit of a disclaimer, I don't want any comments in case partway through the session I put these on and this on this morning. Because it is bitter cold this morning. I'm a winter lover. I'm a verified winter lover. And for me to say I'm a little ticked, it's got cold. So yeah, we're about somewhere around minus 40 to 45 wind chills here this morning. So even the coyotes that are out in our yard yeah, there you go, Justin, are even hunkering down in the snow. So, we have to love technology for the simple reason that it allows us to gather, because I have no doubt if we tried to do this in person today, there would have been a lot of non-travelers, which is great. Plus, we had a chance to talk with Jeanette, I think it was, who's out by Mission, BC a little bit earlier, and that was pretty cool. They're having a cooler time out there too, so it's something that is all across the country. But I'm glad to be here, and glad you could join us in the 4th of the series of something that's really timely, and it's been timely for a long time, but it's grant writing. And the sequel is here. We said during the grant ready session on January 26th that coming your way February 23rd, we're going to get a little bit more into the writing part of granting. Just again, I'll touch on myself briefly. Who I am is I come from a sport, culture, and recreation administration and community development background, education-wise. Worked in municipal work for 34 years, and the last 10, 11 years, I've been doing consulting work predominantly with rural area communities and nonprofit organizations. I love people and I love communities, and I think I have stories to tell. I said, there's a colleague of mine that says, we've been around enough that we just know some stuff. And we like to share it through stories. We aren't the be all end all, but hopefully you can take away some information to make yourself and your organization and your work better today. Specific to grants, I've been in the grant game for over 40 years. And I call it a game, or I call it a race. And I really believe that, I have an understanding of different sides of it. I have an understanding from a nonprofit side, because I've worked in that predominantly, from a municipal side, from a retail business side, or a business side as well, as I was in retail business for 20 years as well. And I also have sat on not only the grant writing side of things, but I've been on adjudication committees at various levels. And so I understand some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of grant readiness and grant writing, and the frustrations. It can be very overwhelming. So does that qualify me? I don't know. I'm going to share some things that I've learned and some of my experiences over the years. Plus, more importantly, I'm going to share some things from people that are in the field as well, just as you folks are. So our agenda today, we're going to be talking about what we want to achieve or our outcomes. We'll do a quick recap of grant readiness, because we were talking beforehand with Jenny and Jessica that, it really, they do meld grant readiness and grant writing, but we've split them into two separate entities for this purpose. But we are going to be doing a little bit of a recap. Then we're going to talk some specifics about writing various aspects of your grant, from your outcomes to your goals, missions, visions, some tips on writing clear and concise financial budgets, evaluation plans, and that type of thing. And then, as I just mentioned, some information from grant adjudicators, administrators, as
it is easy. Okay, this is your origin chart.
are we good to go?
If somebody has their mic, I can't seem to see. There's some feedback from somewhere.
Okay.
You could just
I'll
double
continue
check.
on. Yeah. And some of the things that I find most interesting in presentations are, some of the from the horse's mouth tips from consultants that work in the field, as well as administrators and adjudicators. One thing that you all should have received, and I've added a few things to it, is the financial grants guides and templates book. And again, it's not the be all end all, but if it can help you to provide some guidelines in some of the work you're doing, use it. Change it, rip it apart, use it for grocery shopping recipes, whatever you want to do, if you need to print it off, but it's there for you to use. And you all should have received that via email. But just some of the comments over the years and questions that we've gotten as to what people are looking for. We want to be able to provide better quality answers and explanations. How do we write outcomes or goals? What about my budgeting skills? What about language in our grants and being clarity and concise? Just some best practices and potentially tips, being more proficient. And, I think how not to be overwhelmed. And that is probably, I've highlighted that. That's probably one of the things that I see and hear the most, is people are literally overwhelmed because there is so much grant writing that goes on out there. And I know Jessica was alluding to this in our conversation before the session, that it's a lot of work. And so being prepared is very important, because even being prepared, it takes time. So the things that we want to see you leave with today are some increased confidence, hopefully some additional skill sets that you are able to adopt in your work. I guess, again, instilling the importance of being ready, because I still say that's the plan. And your success is going to hinge on how well planned you are before you start the writing. And again, some of the do's and don'ts, your increased awareness of that. Your willingness to reach out, and I'll be alluding to that in a few minutes, but that's something that we don't do enough. And I'm not just talking in grants, I'm thinking sometimes in our daily work. We sometimes don't reach out for that help or assistance that may be available to us. So I want to start with just recapping some of the information that we talked about a month ago on being grant ready. And what should be in your grant briefcase was what we spent most of the time on. And we broke it down into 4 subcategories. That these are the things you need to have ready in your files before you sit down to start writing. And from your organization's information to information about your funder, the details about what you actually are doing, and then a summary of what you're doing are the basic 4 things. And there's more, there's checklists and that type of thing, but I just want to do a quick review of these things. And again, your organization's information. It can be the most simplistic thing from a list of members that can hold you up when you're sitting there writing. So you need to have your bylaws, your constitutions, and every grant may in fact not call for every one of these items. But over the course of a year, say of grant writing, I would 99% assuredly say that you're going to be asked to provide one of these information, if not some of them in every application. But your mission, your vision of your organization, your goals, possibly your most current audited statement. And again, a history of your organization, that half-page capsule that, and again, you can refer to attachment A in the guidebook that was sent out, that just gives a capsule of who you are and a bit of your history, as well as any social media connections that you have. You need to have that information ready. You need to have the information about your funder. You need to know who you're applying to and whether you fit. What are their missions and visions? What are their requirements for eligibility? What are their priorities? Because every funder has some type of priorities. I think I said it last time that I have not seen a funder yet that just said, here's the money. Actually, once. I'm going to be actually once that did happen and surprise, surprise, it was from the federal government where they had to get rid of some money that was a surplus. And I'm going back to the early 1980s. And we did get a sum of money as a municipality that didn't have any strings attached, but trust government sometimes to dole out money like that. But I haven't seen anything like that since. So, I mean, everybody has priorities. You know, who your grant administrator is, who do we contact for more information? And I talked last time about potentially developing your spreadsheet as you research your grants. Well, here you go. This is an example of what I would suggest you do. Once you research, it gives you a little bit of an at a glance look at the different grants you're going to apply for and what you may in fact need to have gathered ahead of time. So the funder's name, you've got the, do they have a grant application checklist? Yes, they do, or no, they don't. Most do now. But who the administrator is and their contact information, because you need to talk to them in most cases. What their priorities are, or their missions and their visions, so that you can work towards alignment in your application. Are you eligible? What do you have to be? Do you need registered charity? Can you be a municipality? Can you be a for-profit business or a nonprofit? Then the items, what's eligible and what isn't eligible. You know, any supporting documents, other information, the deadlines, as well as, you know, who's responsible. Now, you can change the headings on this to suit yourself, but if you sit down with the spreadsheet like this, it makes your work so much easier as you go to pull files to get ready to write those grants. So I would suggest that you do that. This is also an example of a checklist that an organization, SAS Culture, provides. And this is something that, here's what applicants will probably need to know if you're going to be applying grants from us. And so this is an awesome thing to have in your briefcase, and you can pull that down from any organization because most have that. And again, it states this isn't an application, but these are things that you better be ready and know and be ready to answer in the application. So that's an example from an organization. And I'm sure many of you have seen examples like that. Then you need your project application details. I mean, what are your outcomes? What are your goals? Who's your target? What's your work plan? Supporting attachments, if it's a capital application, do you have blueprints or conceptual drawings? Do you have an action plan? What resources are going to be required? Your budget, as well as your evaluation plan. So those are things that you need to have ready beforehand, because there's nothing worse than sitting doing an application and you get to the next question and you go, oh, I need to figure this out. And sometimes it might take you a half a day to figure some of the information out. And, if you don't take that half a day, and I'm just saying this from experience where I don't have that time, so I made it up. I think I'm pretty close, but I made it up, which was totally unfair to ask me to do that from my organization's point of view. But, and was I successful? No. So when you talk about success, this preparedness is also a huge part of that. Then finally, in your briefcase, the application summary, which is the little quarter page or half a page summary of what you're doing. This often is the first question in many applications, is provide us just a brief summary of what you're doing, because that's the first check off of due diligence of that grant administrator or the committee that's adjudicating. And it sends them the message whether in fact you are of eligible status and whether we even look at you further. So again, those are the things that as a reminder that you need. This is also another checklist, a proposal checklist that you can make your own. You can follow this type of a checklist, but use your own terminology. And again, this can be stapled to your spreadsheet, where these are the things that I actually need, the more specifics. Like, do I have the background or the history of my organization? Is it needed or not needed? So you can kind of paste some of this information, but these are just examples of how you can organize yourself to be more ready and prepared to actually fill in the blanks that you're going to be doing right away. So ultimately, again, what is it that funders really want from all of you? We want proof that you, in fact, are the group that can make an impact and follow through on their priorities. They want to know about your organization. They want to know why you're doing what you suggest and how you align. And displaying that your project directly relates to their priorities. As I said, there's no funder that doesn't have some type of reason or priorities or impact that they're trying to make. So they need that information from you. And they also need assurance that you can actually do what you say you can. And that's the bit of selling yourself in the application details. Your budget projection, and that, they match. And we'll talk about that a little further on. Your evaluation plans, as well as follow-up reports. They want to know that their resources will make a difference. And that's your opportunity to do that, is in the application. And finally, recognition, obviously, is a part of it for the contributions that they've made to your work. But in a nutshell, that's really what the funders are requiring from you as an applicant and what they're wanting to see in your application. So I put a question thing in here, but I think because of the numbers, we'll follow Jenny and Jessica's thing. If you have a question, feel free to put it into the chat. Is that fair, Jenny?
Yep, that's
Okay.
if that's okay with everybody, that'll work great.
Yeah, and we will get them addressed
Yep.
because the potential for a large number of questions is there with a group this size. But that's the recap of being grant ready. And basically that gets us into writing. And I talked about a few minutes ago, taking a look at how can you be the best you can be. And grant writing can be very lonely, as the slide says, because often one person in your organization, especially if it's a nonprofit, is tasked with that job. Or I gave the scenario one time of a secretary treasurer or a CEO having a board member maybe that's been to a conference last week come and put 6 applications on their desk and say, these are due all within the next 2 weeks. Well, for that to fall on one person's shoulders, I recommend take a look at building a grant team. You may get a planner in there, somebody that likes those missions and visions. You hire me. I'm a planning geek. I love outcomes and goals and that type of thing. Look for that tech person that potentially likes to search and do online work from your organization. A writer, a financial whiz that can handle the budgets and actually make your project activities align with the budgets and the resources that you require. And finally, we need somebody to steer this vehicle, a leader of this team. Does it need to be 4 or 5 people? No. It might be 2 people with aligned or just assigned duties. But I would highly suggest that you consider creating your grant team because it can be a really fulfilling experience. And I think it can really take you to the next level when it comes to success. It's, many hands make light work type of scenario. So the due diligence before you go doing a bunch of stuff and potentially wasting your time is to coin phrases from a race. You're on your mark. Should you be applying for this grant in the first place? Are you the right organization? Are they the right funder? Read the guidelines. Take note of your eligibility, your funder priorities, and the funder application checklists. Here's an example. Again, this is what you might be required to submit. And you need to be prepared and know that. Get set. Again, check your briefcase. The things we've just talked about, are you ready with all the supporting documents that you're going to need for that particular application? And most of you that have been in the grant game will know that a lot of our applications, the majority of them are online now, and you're going to have to set up some type of an account or an application portal ahead of time. So that's just something you need to be aware of. And it's time to write. Begin the process. Provide the funders exactly what they're asking for to a T. Follow the instructions. And I think that's important. They've asked for those instructions for a reason. And I guess at this point, as an applicant, ours is not to question why. We might scratch our heads and go, what? Why are they asking for this? But the fact is, if you want to know the why, you check with the grant administrator, but you follow the applications and what they're requesting, because that's what they've asked for. And so that's really important to remember when you're starting the writing. So we're going to talk a bit about some of the details or the application details, some terminology. We'll talk a bit about missions, visions, outcomes, goals, project details, financial budgets, evaluations, and then follow that up with some writing tips. That's basically what we've got left. And, hopefully we'll provide you with some examples. And again, I said there's no easy fix to effective grant writing, but one of the things that's probably best is just practice. If it falls in your wheelhouse, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And especially when you start seeing what you've been successful with and what you haven't been successful with, or take the critiques that you've received. So getting down and doing it. I'm an old 4-H girl from years ago, and the motto of that particular organization was learn to do by doing. And sometimes you just have to jump in with both feet and I highly recommend doing so, but doing it prepared. Terminology. This drives me crazy. It does. And I said it during some of our planning sessions, is that I wish there was a Bible, a dictionary for grant writing, planning, that type of thing. But everybody uses different terms. Some of them are synonymous, some of them are close, some of them take such fine, detailed definitions, and it's like splitting hairs between whether it's targets or objectives. So you need to be aware when you start writing, you take a look at the application forms and the questions that they're asking and the terminology they're using. And if they're using allotments or gifts, or are they using visions, dreams, or ends as a term? A target group or a sector. Evaluation can be a review. Sometimes it's a follow-up. It's used in different contexts. Goals and objectives, targets, your intentions, your achievements, your strategic priorities. They're used somewhat interchangeably. Whether I agree with it or not, they are. And so I know sometimes I'll go, I'm not sure what they're asking for. So if unsure, that's where you need to contact the grant administrator. But understand that many different funders, and again, it depends on their sector, it depends on their background, who wrote the application for them. Some people may be a little more academically inclined in the company that wrote the application or the organization. Somebody might be like me, I'm pretty simple, straightforward language, but you need to understand what you're facing. So if the terminology you take a look at and you're not sure, check it out with those questions for the grant administrator ahead of time. And I'm sure you've all run up against some of these different terminologies, and this isn't all of it. I know there's more, but this is just a pretty broad example of the different words used for similar meanings or asks by funders. We're getting into mission, and I'm going to start this off. Any of you that have joined my other sessions, I'm a firm believer in strategic planning, and that every organization, nonprofit, for-profit, registered charity, municipality, I don't care, should have a strategic direction that starts with your mission, your vision, your values, your outcomes, your goals, those types of things. But if you don't, and again, I'm not in a position of criticizing, that's my soapbox thing. If you have a strategic plan, you should have all of this, and you should be able to just take it out of a file and put it in your grant briefcase. But if you don't, you need to write a mission for your organization. And I use just a basic 5-step process. Is who are you? What do you do? Who do you do it for? What do those people need? And how do your situations change because of what you do? So if you need to develop a mission because you don't have one, answer those questions. And when I did that as a contractor or a consulting contractor, I came up with that I provide facilitation and training for organizations in rural Saskatchewan, striving to deliver meaningful, efficient community services for their citizens, or so their citizens may enjoy well-being and quality of life. That's my mission. So basically, I provide facilitation and training, and followed by the answers to the other questions. This can be shortened up. And again, I don't get too much into wordsmithing, but keep it simple. And that's the whole thing in writing. And I think the common thread through grant writing is keep it relatively simple. But if you don't have a mission, you need to develop one. And this is a fairly simple way to get one done that should be not only applicable, but should be approved by your organization too. And I've told people this before. I was faced years ago with, what's your mission statement? Well, this is exactly how I look. What do you mean? And I made it up. I actually looked what a mission, what purpose, mission, whatever. And I was probably pretty close. But again, you can't be making stuff up. It needs to be reliable and it needs to come from your organization. But you need to start with that if in fact you don't have one. The same with visions. This is your dream, and we're very much, our applications and our funders are into why we're doing what we're doing. Why do we exist as an organization? The mission is what we do, but this is about your dreams. This is the heartfelt vision of what you ultimately want to achieve. And this is what we work our whole life for. And most of us never fully achieve it. But holy cow, this is why we do what we do. And your vision is, if you take a look at what you're doing as a mission and you do everything perfect, what would your world look like? And I always use a fun example that, and I don't think it's their vision anymore, but Ducks Unlimited Canada used to have a vision that went something like, enough ducks to darken the sky forever. And I thought, boy, as a farmer's daughter who grew barley and cereal wheat, that's a nightmare, enough ducks to darken the sky forever. But that was their vision. That was what their organization worked towards. So you need to develop a vision too, by just starting with some phrases. If you do things perfectly, what'll your world be like? And so I asked myself that question. Well, I would see efficiently managed resources. I would see people in rural areas that have quality of life and well-being and quality services. And once you put that stuff together, and your vision can be a lot shorter than this, but my vision would be that rural communities manage their resources towards meaningful quality services that result in the highest quality of life for their people's well-being. And I mean, you can take that and shorten it. Doesn't have to be long. Short visions are good. But when you're doing it, actually, somebody once said, and I stated this in here, bumper sticker visions are good. You know, if you can fit it on a bumper sticker. And so try and shoot for that. But again, get somebody that likes wordsmithing. There's part of your team when you're writing missions and visions. And tell them to keep it simple, because simple and heartfelt is a good thing. So you need to make sure that you develop that as well to be ready for writing your grants. I'm going to keep moving because we've got a lot to go through, but outcomes is the next thing. I mean, you've got your vision and it's up here. It's the ultimate dream. But now through some of your planning, you need to develop your outcomes that will in fact make impact with what you do. And you know, this is the hardest part that everybody has trouble with in grant writing, because it's the intangibles. It's not easy to measure impact. It's not easy to measure outcomes or visions or that type of thing. It's easier to measure how many people were at the session or the what we did. And that's where the what part of the application is the easiest part. But this is the part that will actually make you successful in most applications. And it's the why. These are statements that tell our funder why we do what we do, the desired end results. And they usually want to change something in our environment for the better, or if it's a negative thing that's happening, it might be decrease. It might be decrease in the use of illicit drugs or a decrease homelessness. But a lot of times it's about changing economic, social, health conditions, attitudes. It's about efficiencies, skills or motivation, increased knowledge. I'm sure the outcomes, as I said, what the outcomes for this session are about, I think we used words like awareness, skills, increased independence, increased enthusiasm, those types of things. So that's what outcome statements are. And they're about creating the future and the work that we want to do or the projects that we have. They address why the program is needed. And that's the selling point in an application is why are you doing this? And I'm going to use an example because that's what we've always done isn't an acceptable answer. And I'm telling you, those answers have been put in. This is a program we've run for 34 years, and it's been very successful. That's not an outcome. Because the question is, why have you been running the program for 34 years? What impact has it made? And that sends a message to me as an adjudicator. If you've been running the same thing for 34 years, I've got a red flag because have your outcomes or your needs or issues not changed? And I'm not saying long-running programs aren't valuable, but it does create a little bit of a question of your organization's sustainability and have you changed type of thing. So the other thing to remember about outcomes is we can't directly control them. When you're going to write an outcome, we can only influence outcomes through the work that we do, the goals that we do, and the tasks that we set. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. This is an example. And again, if you look in the guides and templates, there's an examples on how to develop or templates on the questions to answer on how to develop outcomes for your organization. But you have a target group that has some issues that have been identified through a survey and through a rally in this particular example. So here's a bit of the data that you've gathered. And again, you're going to need this information when you're writing the grant. That you have an issue for a certain target group. Now, what impact is it that you're wanting to make? Well, that's the outcomes. So what do we want to change with the issue that we have of lack of skills in our teenagers? We want to see increased skills and knowledge. We want to see an increased confidence and enthusiasm for them to be able to plan events. We want to see increased pride and value that these teenagers have in a community. And we want to develop skills for our leaders of tomorrow. Those are outcomes. That's the impact. But if you notice, you can't do any of those outcomes. You can only influence them through what you do. So here's the example of what isn't an outcome. We should organize leadership workshops for teenagers. And a lot of people get that confused when they're writing grants. When you're writing outcomes, it's about the impact, not what you're going to do or how you're going to do it. So you need to take a look at what improvement do you want to make in the issue. Those are how you go about developing outcomes. So if you look, events shall be planned that will build enthusiasm and confidence. That's wonderful. But the fact is we can control those. Those are more pertinent to the goals we're going to be doing and talking about next. So outcomes are about the intangibles and the better environment you want to create for your target group through the work you do. I hope that makes some sense because this can be confusing. It confused me for many, many years. And I finally had an aha moment, probably about 10 or 12 years ago, where I got it. What we're really doing, folks, is we're working backwards. In English, we write from left to right. In the Arab world, they write from right to left. And that's exactly what we're doing, is we're working from what it is we want to achieve backwards to what we want to do. So we talked about our vision and our outcomes. Now we're slowly getting into more specifics. So effective grant writing is working backwards. You talk about why before you talk about what. And I challenge all of you, if you have people that come to your board table and the first thing they say when they sit down is, what are we going to do? I challenge every one of you to say, maybe we should talk about why we're here first. Because if you're talking about what first, you haven't provided the necessary tools for a grant writer to fill in applications. Now, having said that, the reality of the world is that often we have projects that we know we're going to do. They are going to happen. We may not have developed outcomes for them, but they've just been, that's the way it is. And we all understand that we have a project, let's apply for a grant to try and get some money. Well, how do I develop outcomes for it? I love the 5 whys exercise in developing outcomes, because what it does is every time you ask the question why, it pares away the what and gets finally down to the why of your doing it. And I've given an example, and I encourage you to play this in your office or at your board table. Pick a program that you do and say, we do a youth leadership workshop, and have one person play the devil's advocate and keep track, ask why 5 times. So we say, why do you do that? To teach the youth skills. The next why, that's one. The next one is, why is it important to teach the youth skills? The answer, so they may learn to organize services in the community. Why is it important that they learn to organize services? So they'll value their community and the people within it. Well, why is that important? That's the 4th why. From valuing the community, they will take an active stake in the future and caring. And why is that important? If you notice, every answer gets less and less away from what we're doing and more into the intangible outcomes, where you can pull from some of those answers the final outcome of, we want to develop positive leadership attributes in our youth so they may lead our community into the future. This is a wonderful exercise, and again, it's in the guides and templates as well, and it works. And the first time I used this, people actually got mad at me because they thought I was challenging their knowledge about the program. And I said, no, I'm just trying to get down to why we're really doing it. And, sometimes when you get down to the why and you establish an outcome, it's an aha moment for people to say, that really isn't a priority for our organization anymore. And we really have just been doing this because it's what we've always done. And sometimes this can help to guide your organization too, and say, we should really set that program aside because it's not addressing some of the things that we set are our priorities. So it can be used as a tool for that too, for priority identification. But I love this exercise, and it's a really great way to establish the why of what you're doing in a project. So often in a grant application, you'll ultimately be asked to provide not an outcome statement or points of outcomes. You can do it either way, but this is a relatively strong example of an outcome statement that covers the issue, the need, who it is, and what the outcomes are. And, it talks about achieving quality of life, and that we recognize the importance of our youth in the community, and that they're our future, and we've got to help build capacity in them. So increasing their skills and knowledge development and pride. I mean, that's heartfelt. And if you've got a funder that has youth development in their funding priorities, a statement like this is going to strike a chord with them. So that's the importance of developing outcomes. And some of them can be point form, like I showed you 2 or 3 slides ago as well. But the outcome is about why we're doing what we're doing. The next thing you're probably going to be asked to write, and again, remember terminology. I'm calling them goals. Somebody might be calling, your funders might be calling them something else, but this is about how the organization will be achieving their outcomes. So we want to build capacity in those teenagers in our community. How are we going to affect or change that? How do we wish to change it? So we start writing goals, and they should be very specific, written simplistically, and define what you're going to do. And I venture to guess that most of you would certainly have heard of SMART goals. That when you write your goal, make sure they're specific, that they're measurable, they're attainable, they're relevant, and they have some time-bound aspect to it, that you put a time into it. And that provides what's regarded as a SMART goal, and it really provides good direction for evaluating it as well as to whether you are in fact realizing your goals. So when you're writing your goals, things to remember, here are examples of a not SMART example is we're going to plan and deliver workshops for youth in the community. That says something. But if you really want to follow the SMART process, you probably would say Town X or our Community Development Board's goal is to provide leadership training opportunities in 2023 through planning and facilitating a series of 4 workshops designed to educate, engage, and ignite our teenage youth sector. And I mean, again, you can concise that if you want, but you still need to answer the question. But that is a specific, measurable, attainable, and it's relevant because we're a community development board. If we were an economic development board, specifically working, or a chamber of commerce, it depends on what our plans are, but this might not be a relevant goal because it's maybe not business related. So again, that developing SMART goals holds you accountable to make sure you're doing what's relevant to your organization. And it says we're going to do it this year. Just another quick example that I've written down here of a not SMART goal and a SMART goal. Our organization will help feed the hungry and homeless to make the world a better place. Well, that's a pretty lofty claim. But number one, to make the world a better place, is that really attainable? If I'm sitting in Foam Lake, Saskatchewan, I mean, I can make a difference here, but my goal is to make the world a better place. That's probably not attainable or even measurable for me. So instead, I may look at it that my organization shall distribute 350 meals a day within our community to assist homeless families during 2023. So again, think about the SMART aspect when you're developing your goals, because they're easier to evaluate, and they actually in many cases make more sense. They aren't too broad or gigantic. I hope that makes sense in goal development. I'm going to draw the line right there because that is usually the place in grant applications that we're going, oh my God, that was hard. That was the hardest part of the application. And now we're into filling in the blanks on details, which is usually where most of us reach our comfort zone. This is what we're best at. So I'm gonna, Jenny, are there any, and Jessica, any questions in the chat box about what I call the intangible portion of grant writing?
Nothing so far, unless somebody has something right now to put in.
I think we're good for now.
We're good. Yep.
Hey, we'll carry on because this, to be honest with you, is where we shine. It's what we're going to do or how we're going to do it. We're taking our goals that we just developed, and now we're filling in the blanks. This is describing the projects and the activities that will occur. And again, you need to have this ready. It's what will you do? How will you do it? What resources will you need? Where the details, where will it take place? When and how often? Here's where we show community support, because we have support for this thing. And again, in your guides and templates, it talks about how is this an issue in your community? Do you have support? Think about that before you apply, because that can really help your application. A lot of funders will ask for support from the community. You have to prove you have support for this. It's not just your organization that says it's needed. So are there other organizations in the community that you maybe are partnering with to deliver this, or that share your vision and your outcomes for that particular sector. In this instance, the example I've been using is teenagers. And you in fact have your letters of support. So those are things that now you're going to be cutting and pasting. And I'm going to be using the online analogy because it's been a long, long time since we've filled in paper applications. Not that they don't exist, but if they do, it's probably on a much smaller scale. So when I talk about cutting and pasting and putting a file in, I'm talking about online applications. Your project details, and again, it gets right down to what it's called, the nitty-gritty, the days, the dates, the times, the locations, the sustainability of it, that you may be, how are we going to keep this going? Or are we in fact going to keep it going? Or is it a one-time event that we're not looking to go any further with it? Again, is it to be repeated? Do we have partners? And donor recognition. You're going to, if, you know what, even if it isn't asked for, which it usually is, there's usually very explicit items of how the donor is to be recognized. You probably should be ready with how are we going to recognize our funders and our potential sponsors, even if they aren't asking for that. You need to have a plan in place, because that's just good business, is to be ready to recognize those that have in fact supported our ventures and the work that we do. Part of this is sitting down and what are we going to need? What resources are required? And this is a basic list that covers just about everything. And I mean, you can use your own categories, but from instructors to volunteers, and I'll just touch on volunteers briefly. Again, what jobs actually are required? What positions do they require training? Because in the regulated world we live in today, you're dealing with a lot of things, and people, even if they're volunteers, they may require training and orientation. So those are things that you're going to have to do, or maybe not you, but somebody on your team is going to have to put together some information on the resources required before you start writing and get into this writing. So this is a basic list of resources that are pretty common for any projects, and the detailed description of them. I want to talk, we've talked about, you're going to be writing some things in this last section. And now I want to talk about two words, clarity and conciseness. Is conciseness even a word? I'm not sure, because you have to hold me accountable if I make words up here, because I'm being very critical in this section of things that we should be careful not to do. And I love this quote, jargon everywhere, but not a drop to read. You know, jargon is special language that tend to be used by people in certain sectors. I mean, farmers have jargon, fishermen have jargon, pop culture has certain sayings of the day, like going back to, you know, the 60s, cool man or peace man or that type of thing. Sick. And I've never understood that one, but I don't even know if it's current anymore, but SIC meant cool, or that's pretty neat or whatever. But, you know, eliminate the jargon. We all have our own jargon that we use on a daily basis, but I think the acronyms and the jargon, please eliminate. And I'll use some examples here. Things like, I'm going to add my 2 cents. I'm going to provide you with my brain dump. That's one I heard not too long ago. That means my large body of knowledge. Really? A brain dump. We're siloed. We're cut off or segregated. Silo's been a huge word that we use. I would suggest using the words, you know, we've segregated ourselves as organizations. Siloed, I mean, it can be understood, but it's very much a jargon, or we're going to sunset the issue. Well, we're going to sunset the bylaw. Why don't we just say we're going to repeal it? But we're using jargon that's popular in the day. I will serve our organization's special sauce to you. That one was seen in a grant application. What do you mean your special sauce? Well, that means what makes our programs better than everybody else. It's like McDonald's special sauce. It's a jargon term. We'll give you our spiel in the next section. We're going to get down to the nitty gritty. Our evaluation is going to be our hit counter. Those are things too. You know, I said it here, if you're a plumber, leave your float and flapper talk at home. Leave your jargon talk at home. Just speak plain English. It's highly recommended because jargon doesn't cut it with a lot of applications. Technical terms are also something that you need to be very wary of. One that and it's kind of, technical terms and jargon can be very similar, but one, if you watch Hockey Night in Canada, they're using the word physicality all the time now. And I'm going, physicality? Who are these men and women on the hot stove league desk talking physicality when they could just say, he plays a physical style of hockey, but they're talking, oh, this game is full of physicality. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I was in a session the other day that used the word suasion, S-U-A-S-I-O-N. Well, I'm got my portable device and I'm Googling suasion, and I thought I knew what it meant. It means persuasion, but it's just a new version, a trendy version of persuasion. Well, I've only cut 3 words on it, but why don't we just say persuasion? But I found that really, it kind of frustrated me. You know, metrics, predictive modeling, those types of things, those are technical terms, and it depends on the application you're filling in. But if it's a highly technical application for a very specific sector, no, you may need to use them. But generally I'm going to say from a nonprofit perspective, keep it simple. Again, academic writing. A person said, I read 5 paragraphs and I don't know what you've said. These are not theses or for your masters or your doctorates. And again, I had fun. I wrote this sentence. I had no idea what I was writing, but I thought it sounds pretty cool. The tenets of the hypothesis may have been incarnated towards the benevolent realization that the findings may in fact be conglomerated and hence rendered ineffectual. Academic writing depends where you are. And if you are there as an organization, do it. But 99% of the people in the organizations I'm speaking with, academic writing doesn't cut it. And the adjudicators don't want to see that. They want to see plain, simple English that speaks a heartfelt message. You have to fill in the blanks. You know what you're talking about, but you have to say enough that says it to the people that are adjudicating your grant. Use the terminology that your people will likely understand. Again, if you want to use new terms for old terms like sunset or that type of thing, the recommendation is to don't test it out in a grant application. Test it out at your board level. Test it out with your own people first, but leave it out of the grant applications. Start your new trend somewhere else. Look at your funders' literature, and that'll tell you probably the levels that you need to be at, and don't go higher than that. That can be your guide of what suitability is. You know, be creative through the simple use of language and telling your heartfelt story. The KISS principle, and again, that used to have an extra S on it, but that's not appropriate anymore. We don't call people silly or stupid. It's just keep it simple in all applications. I think is very, very appropriate when you're trying to be clear and concise in your writing. I made a comment as well before we started, and I'm not saying anybody is this way, but not everybody is a writer. And so recognize our limitations sometimes. not everybody can put a good sentence together. And there's nothing wrong with that, but we have different skills in other areas. So recognize your limitations. And if you just can't seem to concisely and clearly write in a heartfelt way, again, reach out, ask for that help. Because we're not all of the same skill sets. Concise. If I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. And that is so true. Writing a clear, concise, short letter takes more time than writing a long letter. And I'm guilty of this because I love writing long sentences and saying things 3 or 4 different ways in one sentence. And I'm totally guilty. And for grant writing, we need to be better at writing short, and practice does make perfect. If you were just getting into this, practicing it over and over again is very important. And again, long sentences, giving lots of quotes and that type of thing doesn't dazzle adjudicators. Again, an example in this sentence, instead of lots of people, use the word many. Many supply long sentence answers. Again, you can save a lot of words, and we're going to give more examples of that, but it's getting rid of those little combinations of word phrases and that type of thing to be more concise. Eliminating the connecting words, the whereases and the therefores, and I love doing that because I fancy myself some type of a legal expert when I use the word whereas. And you know what, in a grant, that's not the time to play with what I think is my expertise. It's time to play with just be yourself and be concise and straightforward. You still need, in being concise, need to take a look at what you've written and say, does it answer the question? So, I mean, you can be concise, but double check that you in fact have answered what they've asked for. Wordiness, again, if I can't pick your ask out in the first paragraph, you've probably lost my interest. And that's going on and on and on. Copying and pasting is can be not to your advantage because it's easy to copy a whole paragraph and say, I've answered the question, but it's way too long. So if you copy and paste, make sure to edit your paste and say, I need to shorten this. Is it concise? Point form, people love it. There's nothing wrong with point form unless it asks for a paragraph. If it asks for point form or doesn't specify, I totally am okay with point form. I love point form. It's easy to read, and I think it's very effective. And again, here's an example of how you can shorten that sentence, you know, by probably 5 or 6 words. Again, being concise. The highlight is the example of saying what I've said in the non-highlighted. So take a look at what you've written and say, can I shorten this? Because when you've only got 400 words or 250 words, if you can save 5 or 6 words out of a sentence, that's pretty important. And adjudicators, most don't mind point form because it's easier to read and they're reading piles of information. So it can be easier and easier to pick up. They don't have to read all the connecting stuff that we've put in the paragraph. Some examples. And again, the check mark is the revised example. There's a 20-word sentence. And again, practice doing this. Please use this attached checklist as a tool to ensure you have gathered the sufficient information before submitting your application. That's a wonderful sentence. Maybe you could say it in 7 words. Utilize checklists to ensure requested information before applying. I just saved 13 words out of my word count. And I said it in probably a simpler, more concise way. There's another example, you know, of going from 11 to 6 words in the next sentence. Again, write your sentence and then see, can I say this in a more concise way? And again, that takes a little bit of time. No to text talk. And we've seen this lots in reports, seen this lots in grant applications. you know, a survey was distributed before the decision was made to okay this project. No, that's not acceptable. It's a shortcut, and unless you're submitting your application on text, which I don't think are doing, please leave your text talk abbreviations at home as well as your acronyms. Again, we shall cooperate with SPRA on program delivery and shall sign an MOU with SUMA and SARM towards future sustainable programs. That might mean nothing to me. I might know that that's a memorandum of understanding, but if I'm not in the sector, a municipal sector, these other acronyms may mean nothing to me. So you may change the sentence, get rid of the acronyms and just use provincial organizations. If they ask for a listing, you may provide that, but you have to give them the full meal deal. The Saskatchewan Urban Municipalities Association instead of SUMA. Don't assume they know. An instance where you might get away with that is if it's an application from SUMA. And they're probably not going to bat an eye at it. But generally, stay away from acronyms and shortening those types of things. So we're going to move on into some just things about money. So I want to know, how are you feeling about financial budgets and your applications? Just to get an idea. If you fill in this hole.
We'll just give a couple more seconds here.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. I will share the results.
Perfect. We have a great level of somewhat confident. That's a really good sign. And some not confident and some need help. I think that's fair too. And again, not everybody, is comfortable with numbers. And the important part about grant writing is that you make sure your numbers, and again, we'll talk about this, actually are meaningful. And that can be a challenge in someone that doesn't really like doing budgeting. So we've got a lot of pretty good financial people, but we have some people that also need a little bit of help. So I think that's pretty consistent in the world we live in. But we'll carry on with finances and budgets. Probably the first thing when you're writing your application is you need to remember your budget isn't separate. It's a part of your application. It's not a separate, it may be a separate section, but that's all. It needs to be a mirror, accurate reflection. Your programs or project activities here need to mirror your budget activities. And all too often, that isn't the case. And that can mean failure for your application. Your revenues and expenses have to balance as well. We aren't allowed to run deficit budgets. And usually if you run a surplus budget, your funder is going to ask, why in fact do you need our money? So you need to make sure your budget's balanced. Plus you need detailed information, and we'll talk about all of these in subsequent slides coming up as well, of how you arrived at your figures. And budgets are estimates. They aren't necessarily guesses. And a lot of people use the word guesstimate, estimate. Don't use those words together. They aren't guesstimates. Budgets are researched estimates, which means you've done your homework. And again, that's part of being prepared. So when you're trying to figure out what to put down for those facility expenses, there has to be some reasonable research that you actually have researched how you arrived at those numbers. Because adjudicators are going to look and say, are these realistic numbers? Because the people that you're applying for usually have, and if it's an adjudication committee as well, they're dealing in this stuff. They have a pretty good idea what's realistic. Do your numbers correspond with your actual project plan as well? And you'd be surprised how often that doesn't happen. And that's a red flag that'll get your application set aside immediately. Does your request match what you have in your budget? And you'd also be surprised at how often that doesn't happen, where we're requesting $5,000, but in the budget, you've only asked for $3,000. Well, that sends conflicting messages. And again, if the funder has said we don't fund capital equipment, don't include it in your budget. If you do, you better make sure that you clarify that our organization is covering the cost of that equipment. It won't be coming out of the grant, but I would suggest don't even include it. And make sure your terminology is consistent. We've seen this from the revenue to the expense side of the budget, where it's called facility rentals on an expense side, but on the other side, it's donations. Well, what is it? Is it facility rentals or is it donations? Make sure that you're calling things the same thing, because that can make for confusion. And you know, in today's world, a lot of grant administrators, they'll check things out sometimes for you. They'll give you a chance to clarify. But you know what? If they're dealing with literally hundreds of applications, you may not get that second chance. So you need to make sure that you are consistent in your terminology. You build your budget, just like you build your plan. You had to figure out what resources we need. Now you need to cost those resources. You need to put an expense or price out your facilities, your staff, your event materials, your insurance, your permits, your licenses, travel sustenance, if that's applicable for the facilitator you're hiring for those workshops for those teenagers. The other question is in kind. And I'll just make one more comment on costing out those budget items. This is where, remember, you know what, you might go, well, where do I get these costs from? Well, you need to, I mean, if it's facilities, you obviously go to the manager and you get the rental prices. But if it's, and I'll use the example of culture and the arts here, because, you know, well, what is a fair price to bring in a comedian for a 2-hour show? Well, if you contact some of our provincial arts and culture organizations, they have access to some general guidelines of what those types of performers may in fact cost you. Or you may decide and get an actual quote from the performer themselves. You get a price from the material. You go to Jenny's husband and get the price for the materials that you need to build that stage, the quote to put in. You go to the business sector or the whatever sector, the municipal sector that's supplying those things and get those quotes. That's your research. Some of those things, once you do this enough, or if you become a seasoned veteran at some of these, you'll know. And you'll be able to budget and say, I know what those costs are. And that's just called experience and from doing these types of things. In kind can be confusing in budgets because different funders ask different things. Some funders want it listed separately. Separate your in kind and just put it in this little column over here. But some funders want it included in the revenue and the expense side. You have to do what they ask. If they in fact do want it included as part of the expense and revenue, but listed under in kind. So I'm putting on a event that I have 4 courtesy cars being donated by the local Chrysler dealer, for example, for the week. Well, there's a cost to that. There's a cost to our dealer. He's donating it. But if we were to rent those vehicles for a week, it would cost us $10,000. He's donating that. So we list that in our expenses under in kind Joe's Chrysler, 10,000 courtesy cars. But we also list it in the, just gonna move the slide, in the revenue section under in-kind, and that 10,000 is an in-kind donation from Joe's Chrysler. So therein lies your balanced budget. So that's really a part of the costs of our event, but it's being covered in kind. But it gives you a realistic value of what your event has actually, or your project has actually costed you if you include it in the budget. Some funders don't care. They just say, list the in-kind stuff outside of the budget. We just want the real hard costs that you're actually writing checks for or taking checks for. So again, follow the advice or the directions of the funder when you're filling in that. But developing your revenue items is the same thing. You take each area and you have to put numbers to it. And I'm just going to go to the next slides, from your participant fees to grants and sponsorships, donations, fundraising, whatever you might have, whatever ticket sales, and that's entrance fees or that type of thing. But you build your expense and your revenues. And this is a very simplistic example of the general numbers. Now, you'll note I said the general numbers, because most grantors are also going to want to know how you arrived at those numbers. We're going to spend $1,000 on event instructors or $1,000 on equipment. Well, what does that mean? Because if we're adjudicating it, well, what are you doing? Quite often there'll be a section that asks for explanation. So you can break it down, and you should have this anyways, even if it's not asked for. If you're asked to produce, how did you arrive at that figure from a grant adjudicator, you need to be able to tell them. So that our instructors for $1,000, here's the breakdown. Here's how we got to that number. And that's how you develop the budget, is listing your resources and putting those numbers. You need to have those details. Some will ask for them, some won't, but you need to have them. If you don't have them, it shows you've probably just used the guesstimate system, which isn't really acceptable. And the same for the revenue details. The breakdown, where did our grants come from? Where did your community funding come from? And that type of thing. And our entrance fees and our budget's balance. Budgets that don't make sense. And again, this comes straight from grant administrators. Budgets that have math errors. That undermines your credibility immediately. If you aren't adding things up correctly, and again, that's just due diligence. If it doesn't support the narrative, and again, we talked about that before, it has to match. When you finish your budget and fill in those numbers, does it match what I've said in the project plan and the activities that we're going to do? Because if I have some type of trip that involves going to, I don't know, the next province as part of it, and that's nowhere in the budget, I don't understand what's going on here. What's in the project is nowhere in the budget. So you need to make sure that they mirror each other as well. Revenues must equal expenses. And again, details. If you've got $2,000 for equipment, you've got to have somewhere how you arrived at that. A lot of adjudicators have said they will look at the project plan and then they'll go straight to the budget and compare the two. That's their first level of due diligence. And if those two things don't match, you're probably going to get put in the if pile. So when you're writing grants, making sure those two things match. And you know, it sounds fairly simple, but you would be surprised at how often that happens. Or you'd be surprised at how often the budgets don't balance. So that's the due diligence in making sure your budgets do make sense. I've got to get moving here. I don't want to keep you guys too long. Evaluation. What bottom line is what gets measured gets done. Almost all, I would say all funders require some type of an evaluation. They need to see if you've moved towards success in your with your outcomes or towards the vision of your organization. If there isn't an evaluation, there's nothing to test, like, was our money well spent? So, I mean, the other thing is evaluations hold us as organizations accountable. What gets measured gets done, because trust me, I have been involved in events that we didn't have evaluations for years ago. Evaluation was basically, did people seem to have a good time? That was the evaluation. And that happens more often than not in our world. But we actually forgot to do components of the event because we got so busy with some of the major things. But if you have an evaluation plan, you know that you're going to be looking at certain components, and it holds you accountable to actually do what you say you're going to do. And that's important for a funder. So evaluation is not optional, and you need to write an evaluation plan in your grant. And it talks about the successfulness of the program. Did we actually realize some of the outcomes? It talks about the event even. Did we manage it okay? You know, did our participants do good and move towards the outcomes? You need to have an idea of what you're going to do for an evaluation plan. Some applications ask for that. Most do. How are you going to evaluate this event? Or how are you going to show us you were successful or not? So your plan, you need to establish what will constitute success. You need to set up success indicators. So we need 20 people. There's quality success indicators, then there's quantity. Quantity is more about numbers. Quality is about feelings and intangibles. It's a little harder to measure, but it's just as important. What type of experience did people have? Participants will indicate they have an increased awareness or increased knowledge. Some success indicators are actual tests. 50% of our people actually wrote the test and received certification. That's a success indicator. So you're going to need to list some of the statements of what will success look like for our event. Then you need to talk about what information we need to gather to measure the success. What test results, participant registration tracking, opinions on the program organization. Those can mean surveys. This is how are we going to get that information? We're going to get it through surveys and testimonials. We're going to interview some people. This session is going to be evaluated because Jessica and Jenny need to justify that there was hopefully some impact made because of this. And they do that through gathering information from you folks. Then finally, you need to plan on who will gather the information and when they'll actually present it. So that's a plan. And then you need to follow through on it. But grant rating will require you to make sure that you write some of these things in your evaluation plan. Pursuant to that is the general follow-up. And every grant funder will have a follow-up process whereby you have to submit your evaluation plan. It's your responsibility to provide them how things, a report on how things went. And if you're delinquent in this type of things, you can kiss future grants goodbye. You need to be diligent in following up and making sure that your funder has heard from you and has been given the information they require in their follow-up by the date that they want it as well. And again, here's a list of things that follow-up can include, and that's outlined on pages 20 to 24 in the guide. And again, these aren't prescriptive, but they're general areas that you can expect to have to follow up on as well. We're getting down to the last part here, and I know I've got about 5 minutes left, but I might take 10 if that's okay. These are from tips and advice from actual grant administrators and consultants that have been in this field for a long, long time. Get an objective reviewer. Once you've written your grant, get somebody that's arm's length from your organization. Maybe the person across the hall that works in a different, for a different company or a different organization. Get them to take a look at it. Does it make sense? Do they understand your ask? If they do, that's a pretty good pat in the back that you're on the right track with what you've written. If they're going, I don't get it, you've got some work to do. But an objective reviewer can be a really valuable tool of diligence before you actually hit send. I love the 12-12-12 rule. It's wonderful. You assume that your application is being read by an adjudicator at midnight that has been working for 12 hours, and you're the 12th application he or she has read. You've got your work cut out, because this gal or guy is working at 12 midnight and is tired. And so you have to be able to inspire that person that is the 12-12-12 rule. It's a fun way to think, have I done my job to make a person at midnight think this is cool, what I'm writing? So take a look at that. Plain and simple language and proofread. Again, spelling and grammar and glaring mistakes, they send the wrong message. And proofreading can be done by other people as well. That's the objective reviewer aspect. Try not to repeat phrases that are straight out of your funder's guidelines, because that actually kind of screams plagiarism. You can refer to them because you're trying to show alignment with their guidelines. But if you're just reiterating what they're saying, it really makes it look cut and pasty, which is not what you want to do. You want to show the impact without being, and again, I'm using jargon, gushy. Do you know what I mean by gushy? We can get so inspirational that it becomes enough already. And actually, I was at a religious service the other day that I just quit listening because it got too gushy. And I found I just started looking around until the deliverer of the message stopped talking. So you need to be inspirational, but you need to know when to draw the line. You need to be accurate. Vagueness does not sell what you're trying to do. Sincerity and honesty. And, you know, inspirational words, telling stories is the best way to do that. Share the real people and real things. You know, that's, and I'll use our Indigenous neighbors. They're masters at it. They're storytellers. And when I listen to some of the inspirational stories that some elders have told, it's very simplistic, but it's about real people and real things. And so use that as a guideline. And I don't think you'll go wrong in your writing. Pull from your organization, things that you've actually done. And that'll go a long way to inspiring. The lingo, again, we covered that. Be understandable of the different lingos that are available, or not available, that are used, and know what's appropriate. Don't. Here's a list of don'ts. Unanswered questions. Don't send me 6 megabytes of materials if I haven't asked for it. One administrator said, don't give me fluff. Just give me the information that I've asked for. You know, it's like the new person in town where we take them 1,000 brochures when in fact they only really want to know about one thing. Don't give them stuff they don't want. You need to assume they don't know you, so fill in the blanks in a clear, concise way. Continuous applications, that can be dangerous. Most applications have a start and a finish time. If you say our program is continuous, that sometimes, more often than not, sends the message that you don't have a plan. It's continuous. No, that sends a red flag up for most adjudicators. Talk about your solutions. And we can get into this trap easily, talking about, we don't have this, we need this. our poor kids, our poor business sector, our poor that. No, talk about the solutions that you're planning to apply and use this money for those problems and issues. Talk more about the solutions. Again, be specific. And from a grant adjudicator, one of the top things was don't, and this is jargon, don't BS me. I've seen everything. And I have a really, this particular adjudicator said she has an innate ability to smell something that isn't accurate from a mile away by the way it's written. So be honest and be transparent. Don't fly by the seat of your pants. Sell yourself. Don't be humble, but again, find the line, draw the line between being humble and selling yourself. Use short answers, get to the point. Ensure your web page, and I said this with grant readiness, this is really important. Ensure your social media matches your application. A lot of times we build ourselves up, but our social media sites are 2 years outdated. And adjudicators check your social media sites. They'll take a look and say, that's a due diligence aspect of, do these people actually do what they say they're doing? And if your social media site doesn't measure up, that could actually put you in a, we better check this out with them position. And I'm huge on building relationships. Don't just talk to your funders when you want money from them or resources. Send them information, send them an update, sometimes in the middle of the year, and just say, you know, we're doing some really unbelievable things with our programs, and we just wanted to stay in touch with you, and hopefully we can be partners again. It's like, use the analogy of, we all have that one friend that only calls you when they want something. Don't be that applicant. Build the relationships ongoing with your funders. Stay on the radar. Stop and have a coffee with the manager of the local bank. And just say, I'm not here asking for anything. I'm just here to say, our group is doing great. That's huge. Look for help. Build a team. You aren't alone. If you're asked for responses or clarification, that means you're getting looked at. Don't ignore it. Be very prompt in your responses. Deliver what you promised and use all the funds that you asked for. Thank and recognize your funders. And you know what? I love this last one is ask your participants to thank your funders. And I'll tell you a story. That bank manager I was just talking about did a huge funding project for a youth organization. That organization there was probably about 50 youth from the community in the surrounding area. They said, we want you all within the next 6 months to stop in that bank and ask to see the manager. And these are kids that are like 10, 12 years old. And just thank them. Tell them you were a participant in the program that they sponsored and tell them what it meant to you. Well, number one, all those kids didn't do it, but this gives me goosebumps. That bank manager got a pile of those children coming in, shaking his hand and saying, thank you. That program was awesome, and we know you gave money so that the community could put it on. You don't think that makes a difference when you go back? It's huge. So, you know, that's building relationships and being as personal as you can. And you can still be personal, even if your funder is 2,000 kilometers away. You can be personal just with tastefully done pictures and saying, here's our kids. Here's the result of what you helped us build. Stop and think about that because it's huge. It's huge in this particular initiative of grant writing and sponsorship. Just in summary, this is a bit of the bad. You've got to be believable. Don't contain errors. Don't cut and paste. Fishing expeditions. Don't just cut and paste and send it to 100 different applications. It shows. You need to add that little personal touch to every application. That's being a good grant writer. You need to align with your funders and what their priorities are. You need to be clear or you're on pace for denial, to put it bluntly. Positive. You're making changes. It's about why. Sell the positive impact you're making. Make it real. Make sure your finances match the impact you're going to make. Evaluation, show that we want to make sure that we see if we've made some impact. And finally, follow the funder guidelines. You know what? Whether you think they're unreasonable or not, that's not your call. You follow those guidelines 100% because that's what they've asked. And you shouldn't go too wrong if you kind of use that as a guideline. So that's some grant writing along with a lot of grant readiness and preparedness. I guess, how are you feeling? With regards to actually sitting down and writing your grants, I know you guys have if you could fill in this poll, it'll give us an idea of maybe where we've gone in the last hour and a half.
I think I have the first one on. Just let me switch here.
Okay.
I stopped sharing. Let me see if I can get the right one up here.
Should be Grant.
There we go.
If
Yep,
able to.
there we go. There we go. Sorry about that.
Now, if anyone has any questions and you have to run off, I'm just going to type in my email address here. And if you would like to just email a question, then I can speak with Shelley and get back to you.
Absolutely. You can share my email, and anybody has any questions, or if if you've got questions about potential resources or whatever, I'm more than happy. Just fire me an email, and if I can help you, I want everybody to be successful in the chasing the grants and the finances that they have. And so if I can help in any way, I'm more than happy. Just fire me an email, and once I thaw out my computer, I'll answer you.
I'm just sharing the results there from the poll.
Okay. So we're looking at, we've got some extremely prepared. I love to see the biggest one is somewhat prepared. Some have some work to do and some have lots of work to do. I'm really glad to see we don't have anybody that answered not sure, because that sends a message to me that something was able to be taken out of the last couple presentations on grants to help you and your organization be better and be more successful. It takes practice, and when you figure you got it worked out, you get an application that something different in it. So you've just got to try and stay current, and but it takes time, and it takes research and patience and practice. So thank you for sharing your feelings on that. And again, I'm glad you could join me. Hopefully you walked away with something of value, and I'll leave it at that.
We do have one question in the chat. It just said, have you come across any federal development grants?
Again, yeah, Jenny, you guys can probably answer that one better than me.
Well, I know that a lot of the community futures offices, we get a lot of that information sent through our offices. We're always, I always strongly suggest to check with the office. We've got a few resources that we can go to do some looking. What's out there, and I know that you'd mentioned Sports and Rec. They have a lot of stuff they always send out to us. We get a pile of newsletters in our office that I'm always reading and checking on the grants. I have a few websites that I'm always checking, so feel free to reach out to our office and I'll see what we can find. There are some different resources out there that we can try to find out what's there.
Jenny, I think too, if there's a recording of the grant ready session, we talked about searching for grants.
We did. So
some specific things mentioned, but one thing when you're talking federal, use your MP, use your MP's office. They have a huge database of things available to help their constituents, or your provincial MLAs, that type of thing. But if you go back and take a look at some of the, if it's recorded or whatever on your websites or whatever, there's some information about grant searching, and there's a lot out there.
Yep,
But,
there is.
one of the best ways I found is if you have a parent organization, and I'll just grab a Chamber of Commerce. If you're a local Chamber of Commerce and you belong, say, to the Provincial Chamber of Commerce, you start getting automatic updates. That provincial body provides you, in many cases, with here's grants that are coming up, folks, and they usually give you a good couple months notice. Be ready. This is coming. Here's the deadlines, and it's a list of applicable grants. So make sure any of your parent bodies that you may belong to, most of them provide services like that, and it's wonderful because it spoon feeds us.
Yep. And I know also on our Facebook page, as we come aware of any of the grants, we're always sharing them on there as well. So make sure you check out Sage Hills and Northwest's Facebook pages, because we make sure that, you know, as the grants come available, we put the stuff on there as well.
Absolutely.